Your PhD involves a series of important decisions, and one of the most important decisions to make is who is your external examiner going to be? Who's going to examine your thesis? Now, in this video, I'm going to be focusing on the external examiner, but it's important to be aware that the external examiner is not going to be your only examiner. You're likely going to have an internal examiner too from your own institution, and there's also going to be a chairperson who will oversee the examination process. So the external examiner is not the only person who's going to be in the room, you know, the physical or virtual room with you, but I would say that they are the most significant person in that room. So we need to be really careful when we're making decisions and choices about who the external examiner is going to be. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and for the last 20 years, I've been supporting social science students through their dissertations. Now, in that time, I have been an external PhD examiner, and I have helped choose PhD examiners for my own students. And I've learned quite a lot of things in that process, which I hope are going to be helpful for you when it comes to choosing your external examiner. So we're going to be looking at three things in this video. Your role as a PhD student in the process of selecting your external examiner. Secondly, some criteria to consider when you're thinking about who to choose as an external. And thirdly, the importance of having a plan B. So let's get into it. Firstly, your role in this process. Now, you should always be involved in the decisions that are being made around an external examiner. You should never be in a situation where you just find out who your external examiner is. Now, you're not going to be making any of the fine detail arrangements for your PhD Viva yourself, because your supervisors, your institution, they're going to look after that for you. But when it comes to selecting your external, you need to be involved in that process. You need to be consulted in that process. You need to be an active participant in making that decision, because your external is examining you. Okay, they are not examining. They are not examining your supervisory team. So they are your examiner, and you need to have a say in who they are. Some supervisors try to nudge their PhD students towards particular examiners, whether that's people who are in their own networks, whether that's people who they know are going to give you a relatively okay time of it, whether that's because they just feel that this person is appropriate for you. And it's important that you take on board the views of your supervisory team, because they're experienced in your field. They know the people in your field. So you need to listen to their advice, but they should also listen to the things that you've got to say. And during your PhD process, you will have been coming into contact with other academics, with other people in your field, and you may well have met people at a conference or an event, and you thought, oh, they would be a good examiner. So things like that are important as well. So listen to your supervisors and draw on their knowledge of your field and their experience with other people in that field, but also feel free to make suggestions of your own. So bring up in your supervisory meetings, hey, I was at this conference last week and I met, you know, this professor or this person. I think potentially they might be a good external for my PhD. So always do that. Always make the effort to actually make suggestions and propose potential people. Okay, next up, we need to go through some criteria that you might want to look at in terms of choosing an external examiner, but more importantly, I think in terms of coming up with an initial shortlist of potential examiners. And I think this is an important thing to do, because in my experience, I've had situations where we've had an external examiner lined up, and this is somebody that we've identified fairly early on. I can't even get my words out today. Can you tell that, you know, it's a bit late in the day? So what was I saying? Okay, so I've had experiences where we've had an external examiner kind of lined up and sorted out from a fairly early stage in someone's PhD journey. And then something has happened, so they might have gone off on sort of some kind of sick leave or parental leave, or they're taking a career break, or something else has happened, or they just completely leave academia altogether. And then we've had to go and find somebody else, often at the last minute. which is not ideal. So the best thing to do is to have a shortlist, a pool of potential externals. So you can have your number one choice, but you also need a second choice and a third choice as well, I think. So when you're looking at these criteria that I'm about to go through with you, you might want to set up like a little grid, a little table, and put a few people's names in that table and tick off the particular criteria. So always have a shortlist, always have options. The first and the most obvious thing to look at is this person's current expertise in the field. So you need somebody who is a recognised authority in your area. And there are a few things that indicate whether somebody's an authority or not. In terms of the level of their career that they're in. They might be a senior academic, a professor with 20, 30 or more years experience behind them. They might have a really lengthy publication record, and those two might not go hand in hand. You might have somebody who is not so far on in their career, who hasn't reached the heady heights of professor yet, but is really well published and is a real expert and is a really big name, a kind of up and coming person. So being an expert, having expertise currently in the field, you need to look out for that. And I would emphasize the word currently here. So it's not going to be helpful for you if you've got an external who published something really significant like 25 years ago, but hasn't really done much since then. Or they did that publication like a couple of decades ago, and then their research has taken them off in a completely different direction, and they're not really well up on what's going on in the field at the moment. So always make sure that expertise is current as well as just present. It can also be really helpful if your external examiner is somebody who edits one of the leading journals in your field, because journal editors have this fantastic overview of things that are generally going on in your discipline more broadly. They know the research that's been published in the field, but they also know about the research that's coming through, because they are regularly getting papers and ideas landing in their inbox from other academics. So they can really scan the horizon very well in terms of your particular field. So they can be really valuable external examiners because of that broad overview that they have. The last thing that I want to say about expertise and experience is about alignments with your research methodology or with your theoretical perspective. So you want to ensure that if you've used a particular methodology, a particular approach, that your examiner is familiar with that. So if you are like a hardcore qualitative researcher and your PhD has involved like 2 years of in-depth ethnography, it's probably not going to work out very well if your external examiner is like a heavy quantitative person who just does like online surveys and statistical analysis. You need to make sure that there is some alignment there. Also in terms of theory, so if your PhD has approached your topic from the perspective of critical race theory or queer theory or feminist theory, you need somebody who's familiar with that. And even if they're not like aligned with it, even if that is not their thing, they need to have a knowledge of it to be able to examine you adequately on it. Next up is experience as an examiner. So if your external examiner is a really experienced examiner and they have examined, 10, 15, 20 plus other PhDs, they are familiar with this process, they are confident themselves in the process of an examination, and that can be something that is really beneficial for you as a student. Now, I'm not saying that you should never ever consider somebody who has never examined a PhD before, but I think you always need to be aware that when you have a new examiner, there are probably going to be other things that you need to do or your supervisory team need to do to kind of counterbalance that. So in a lot of institutions, if your external has never examined a PhD student before, many institutions will insist that you have a second external examiner. So you essentially end up with 2 external examiners. And that can create a few issues in terms of the logistics, in terms of, getting these 2 people in the same room at the same time, in terms of how well these people work together, all of that kind of thing. So those are things that you need to consider. But I'm not saying that you should completely kind of rule out anyone who hasn't examined before, but just be aware that that will come with some additional things for your institution and for your supervisors to do to ensure that everything is in place that needs to be in place. The next criteria is impartiality. So there can't be conflicts of interest between your external examiner and you, or between your external examiner and your supervisory team. So some of the things that you need to be aware of here, the most obvious one is publications. So if you have written something with someone, that someone can't then be your external examiner because that relationship is a little bit too close. It's worth having a look at your institution's rules and regulations around this. They usually specify that you shouldn't have written with somebody within a particular number of years. So if you've been in academia for a long time and you're doing your PhD right now and you wrote a paper with someone 15 years ago, but you haven't had a lot to do with them since then, that might be okay for them to be your external. But those are things that you need to be aware of. So kind of publishing a paper, a book, whatever together, yeah, probably kind of put somebody out of the running. Also, be careful around sort of edited books, edited collections as well. So if you've written a book chapter during your PhD and it's been published in an edited collection, some universities will say no to that person being your examiner because they do feel that that is a conflict of interest, that involves, you know, working with that person. Other ways in which you may have been, you know, too close for comfort when it comes to an examining relationship is if you've applied for funding with somebody, whether that funding bid has been successful or unsuccessful, that normally rules someone out. If someone has ever been your line manager at work, that also rules them out. And it doesn't matter if they have since, you know, left the institution, if they have been in a kind of line management relationship with you or in some kind of mentor relationship with you, that's something that the institutions don't look very favourably on in terms of impartiality with an external examiner. So there are lots of things that you need to take into consideration. And another thing that is worth saying that probably is not going to apply in many cases, but it's definitely worth flagging up, is your external examiner can't be somebody who has been in some form of, you know, interpersonal relationship with you or a member of your supervisory team. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because academia is a very small world, especially within some particular disciplines where, you know, they're not massively populated. There aren't, you know, thousands of people working in a particular discipline. You know, it might be hundreds. People do tend to kind of marry, live with, have relationships with people that they work with. And that brings complications very often into the kind of arrangement of examination teams at times. So just be aware of those kind of things, because you need to flag all of this up and be aware of all of these things around impartiality before your Viva has taken place, before it's all kind of done and dusted. Because if somebody starts asking questions about this later on down the line, if, you know, in 2, 3, 4 years time somebody says, well, it's no wonder they gave them the PhD because their supervisor's married to the external examiner, you know, or whatever. So you just got to be conscious of that now. One other thing that I want to mention, which kind of relates to impartiality in a way, but I don't know whether it really does, but I'm just going to chuck it in here anyway, is having an examiner who has a reputation of giving students an easy ride, of just kind of waving through a PhD student. Now, the fact that there's an external, the fact that there's an internal examiner as well, should kind of prevent this sort of stuff from happening, but it doesn't always. So there have been times where I've been aware of in my career of PhD students at other institutions who've been examined, and they've been examined by somebody who's a bit of an easy ride examiner, who just kind of is like, oh yes, this is all fine, whatever. And the internal hasn't kind of stood up to the external, because the external is some kind of rock star within the discipline, or somebody that the internal doesn't want to upset. And it's, oh, there's all kinds of stuff kind of plays out within examining teams, but you do need to be conscious of these easy ride examiners, because you've worked really hard on your PhD, you want somebody who is going to give you a relatively tough time in your Viva, a critical analytical evaluation of your research. You don't want somebody who's just going to wave it through. And I've come across several cases of this during my career, and the students who get waved through by an examiner who is particularly kind of soft or amenable, or the supervisory team have gone, just past this one. That happens. It shouldn't, but it happens. Those students, they're not looked upon for the rest of their academic careers, in as favourable terms as people who had a relatively rigorous Viva, a tougher Viva, an examiner who really did put them through their paces. So you want to be conscious of that. So it's worth kind of being aware of who the easy ride examiners are, because every discipline has them. So you might want to do a little bit of asking around about that. And the academic world, as I've said, is a small one. So you will come to hear about examiners who just basically wave students through and don't really give them a very tough time of it. So just be aware of them and avoid them like the freaking plague. The next criteria is being a decent human being. And I think this is a really, really important one. So you want an examiner who is an expert in their field, who is going to be rigorous, who is not going to give you an easy time of it. But you need to also ensure that this person is a decent human being. Now, most people in academia are, okay, but there are exceptions to that. There are people who are, to be quite frank, jackasses in PhD Vivas, who give students a disproportionately hard time just because they're mean, and there's some kind of sadistic side of them that enjoys, making people squirm. So you need to avoid those people. Now, how do you avoid those people? You become aware of who they are. Okay, academia, as I've said, countless times in this video already, is a small world. You will get to know who the people are who are not very nice, either through a contact with them yourself or what you hear from other people. And that is something that I would definitely say to be very careful of, is please do not under any circumstances choose an external examiner who neither you nor any of your supervisory team have ever met in person. So you don't want somebody who you don't kind of know on some kind of level. You've never had any sort of face-to-face interaction with them, because whilst you can see what that person is like on paper and by reputation, if none of you have ever had any sort of face-to-face interaction or contact with them, they're still a bit of an unknown entity. And as far as I'm concerned, that's too risky. That is way too risky to put that examiner in front of a PhD student, because this isn't just a kind of hit and hope, suck it and see kind of situation. This is your PhD Viva. Okay, so we need people not just that we know of, but that we've actually met. Now, the last criteria is logistics. You're not going to need to worry about this too much yourself, because your institution, your supervisory team, they're the ones who are going to make the actual arrangements for the Viva examination itself. But they're just something that you should be aware of. So when you are going through and creating your shortlist of externals, you need to be aware of where this person is currently based. Are they on the other side of the world? Also, things like, are they due to be going off on study leave at any particular point? Are they going to be going off on parental leave? Are they going to be leaving academia altogether? Like, what are their plans? So just being aware of those types of things does help you kind of rule some people out fairly early on. So just talk to your supervisors about these kind of issues. And another thing is that often people will go off on like sabbatical leave, or they will have their time bought out because they're working kind of full on a research project. So you just want to be aware of anything like that is sort of around in the orbit of your potential examiners. And finally, the last point, and I talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but I'm just going to reiterate it now. It is always worth having a plan B. Okay, it's worth having a backup plan, because stuff happens, shit happens, life gets in the way. Sometimes an external is not going to be able to actually do your Viva, is not going to be able to come and examine you for whatever reason. So you need to have a backup plan. You need to have a stand-in external who is somebody who will be ready to step in if needs be. Now, this is something to consider throughout the process of your dissertation. It's something you need to be talking to your supervisors about on the regular, and just having somebody in the background, if you need them to step up, can be a really useful thing to do. It can be a bit of an awkward thing for your supervisors to kind of negotiate and arrange, because it's quite sensitive, okay? Nobody wants to be asked to be the number two. But that's for your supervisors to worry about. That is not for you to worry about. So you talk to them about that. And they can negotiate all of the niceties that need to happen around somebody being a stand-in. And that's it. We are done. So hopefully you've picked up some useful tips there in terms of choosing your PhD examiner. So we have covered in this video the importance of you being involved in this process. We've gone through some of the criteria that you might want to look for when you're thinking about potential externals. And lastly, we've talked about the importance of having a plan B, of having a stand-in external. So hopefully that's been helpful. That's given you some things to think about that perhaps weren't on your radar before. And I will be back in the next video with more tips on all things dissertation and postgraduate study. So I will see you then.